I hope that this next point is obvious. A lender is not under an obligation to give you a mortgage. The mortgage process is essentially an interview where you're stating your case as to why a lender should consider giving you hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to buy a house. Just like how we want to invest in good companies in order to build wealth, mortgage lenders want to lend to good borrowers who have a high probability of making their payments in full and on time. Instead of investing in companies, they invest in people. Only once you're able to prove that you're a good investment will they lend to you. In my experience of helping dozens of Canadians buy homes and talking to hundreds more, there can be a huge disconnect between expectations and reality. There's been cases where the absolute last thing someone should be doing is buying a house, but that's exactly what they're set on. Or despite bankruptcies, mountains of debt, and terrible credit, people are confused as to why they don't qualify for the best rates. In this lesson, we're going to hopefully do two things: get a better understanding of the mortgage process, and learn about what you need to do to put yourself in the best position to buy a home. Your maximum purchase price is going to depend on two things: your qualifying income and your down payment. The more money you earn and the more savings for a down payment you have, the more expensive the house that you can buy. Generally, someone can get approved for a loan around 4 times their income. For example, someone earning $100,000 per year could get approved for a mortgage loan of up to around $400,000, putting their max purchase price at $400,000 plus their down payment. I say up to because lenders will have to account for someone's debt, and any outstanding debt someone has will actually lower their purchasing power. Lenders look at two ratios: your gross debt service, or GDS, and your total debt service, or TDS. GDS only looks at expenses associated with owning the house, things like your mortgage payment, property taxes, heat, and if applicable, 50% of condo fees. These expenses typically can exceed 39% of your before tax income. TDS looks at everything that GDS does and adds any additional debt. Things like credit card debt, student loans, vehicle loans, personal loans, and the cost of owning other properties. Your TDS typically can't exceed 44% of your before tax income. So if someone has a significant amount of debt, it could greatly reduce what they can borrow. Because of this, you generally want to go into the home buying process with as little debt as possible. This not only puts you in a prime position to borrow, but it should also positively impact another lender consideration: your credit score. Your credit score reflects your past and present self's relationship with credit, and it's used to gauge what type of borrower you might be, by understanding what type of borrower you've been. If you've always paid your bills on time, it's reasonable to expect that to continue. Of course, situations can change, but it's the best resume of your credit worthiness there is. There's 5 main things that contribute to your credit score: payment history, utilization, credit history, new credit, and credit mix. Payment history is straightforward and accounts for the largest portion of your score. Making the minimum payments on time reflects well on you and helps maintain and build your score. Utilization is a tricky one. Basically, the higher the percentage of your available credit you're using, the more it'll negatively impact your score. If someone maxes out their $500 limit credit card, it'll actually impact their credit score more than someone who has a balance of $5,000 on a $10,000 limit credit card. Once you get above about 40% of your limit, you could start to see your score decline. Credit history refers to the length of time you've had credit. The longer your history and the more data there is to support that you are a good borrower, the better. New credit captures how many new sources of credit have recently been opened and how those accounts are used. And credit mix refers to different sources of credit, like credit cards and loans. Having a long history of different types of credit can show you know how to manage them responsibly. Paying down debt prior to buying a house would help improve your utilization, positively reflect on your payment history, and help increase your net worth. A safe benchmark for your credit score would be around 700. Some lenders have lower requirements, but 700 should put you in a position of having multiple options rather than having to settle. Even if your credit score is above 700, if you've recently gone through a bankruptcy, consumer proposal, or had bad credit that recently improved, lenders might require you to wait or demonstrate better habits for a period of time before considering lending to you. Now, it is important to also note that you don't have to buy at your max. What makes more sense is to base what you can afford on your current spending and saving habits. Lenders will want you to borrow as much as possible because they would make more money in interest. But if you like to take trips or have other financial goals alongside owning a home, those are things lenders won't really care about. If you buy at your max, you could find yourself being house poor, having so much of your income go towards owning and maintaining your house that you're unable to afford doing anything else. So it's important to find balance and not just assume that what you could get approved for is where you need to buy. You might have a much happier life buying a less expensive house that allows you to have the cash flow to pursue what matters most to you. Once you have an idea of what you could reasonably get approved for or the price point you'd like to buy at, you will have a better idea of what you need for a down payment and to cover closing costs. Here in Canada, you need a down payment of at least 5%, and most lenders will want to see about 1.5% of the purchase price set aside to cover closing costs. Because of this, I like to approach it thinking that we need at least 7% set aside, and the closer we can get to 10%, the better. The reason being, you don't want to be nickel and diming just to make sure you have exactly enough. And you also don't want to take on a major responsibility, like owning a home, with a depleted bank account. Ideally, you'd still have your emergency fund set aside, not attributing to any of the savings needed. So if you're purchasing a home for $500,000, we need at least $25,000 to cover the down payment, and an additional $10,000 should comfortably cover any additional expenses relating to closing costs. And remember, we don't have to just strive for the minimum. Anything above these amounts puts us in a better and more comfortable position, and not only to buy a house, but a better financial position overall. The biggest challenges that I've seen for Canadians when it comes to buying a house circle the main things we've discussed so far. Not having realistic expectations for what they can afford, having outstanding debt that significantly impacts their ability to borrow, less than ideal credit scores that makes them look like an unattractive investment, and a general lack of savings making owning a house financially risky. We need to think about our entire financial situation when it comes to buying a house. We need to do so in balance and not overextend ourselves in one direction or the other. Being a homeowner is great, but it does come with additional responsibilities and costs. Buying a house without an emergency fund or the proper precautions in place can lead to disaster. Or buying a house without thinking about how all of our other goals fit in will likely lead us to a place of unnecessary compromise. We need to approach buying a house in the right mindset, thinking big picture, acknowledging everything, and ensuring above everything else that it all makes sense and fits together. We might feel pressure or a clock ticking in our head telling us to buy sooner than later, but buying at the wrong time can be the worst decision we could have made. In real estate transactions, the seller pays both the buyers and sellers' realtors, and there can be a lot of costs that go into and are associated with selling a home. And mortgage payments are structured so that your initial payments are very interest heavy, and over time, the allocation between interest and principal gradually becomes more principal heavy. The rate that you pay off your balance accelerates over time. That's why timing is so important and why the idea of a starter home is becoming less appealing. To really make a dent in your mortgage balance, you need to live in your home for a number of years. Otherwise, buying with the intent of selling in a couple of years could easily end up being a negatively returning investment, one where you might have been better off renting and not owning at all. We have to understand that buying a house is not a right. It's not something that we can just assume or expect to happen. It has to be worked towards and earned. But it's not complicated. You want to be the type of person that you would feel comfortable lending money to, with the confidence that you would be able to pay yourself back in full and on time. If you're able to honestly say that, then you're on the right track.